You sold your home last year for more than you expected to get for it. Is that gain now taxable when you file your taxes this year? I've got that and more coming up. My name's Mike Bernard. I'm the host of the Wise Money Show. I'm also one of the certified financial planners right here at Korhorn Financial Group. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and smash that thumbs up button. The housing market has been roaring now with interest rates so high and the Federal Reserve trying to squash inflation. Will the housing market actually cool off? The interesting thing, and let me get on the soapbox for just a second, is inventories remain pretty low, right? And when there's not a lot of inventory, when there's not a lot of supply, even a little bit of demand can push those prices up or make sure that prices don't come down. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this plays out with whether we see a soft landing or a hard landing with the economy, what happens with inflation, whether we see a double top inflation, what happens with interest rates. And again, if not a lot of people are looking, saying, well, I don't really want to get rid of my 3% mortgage and exchange it for a 7% mortgage. I'm not going to sell my house right now, even though I would love to. Then inventories will remain low, and any sort of demand will keep the pressure on prices to stay high. And it's interesting. We will see. But right now, as I'm recording this, we're in tax season. And a lot of people last year sold their home for way more than they expected their house to be worth a couple years ago, right? And so maybe, now over the past 12 months, you think, oh my goodness, my house is worth this. Yeah, I should sell it. It's time. It's time. We've been wanting to move, and I'm willing to exchange my low interest mortgage for a higher interest mortgage, or we're debt free, so therefore I can capture selling my house. Maybe with all of its, bumps and bruises on it, I can sell it at still a high price, and I'm going to have to pay more for the next house, but it would be an upgrade. When you do that, and you sold your house for more than what you bought it for, or more than what you thought it was even worth recently, do you have to pay tax on that gain? Well, you might, but thankfully, due to some tax rules that have been around for a long time, a lot of people where you're just selling your primary house and buying a new one, a lot of people get to avoid having to pay tax on that gain. So it breaks down where you've got first two qualifying questions, okay? And this really is the rudder that helps determine whether it's taxable or not. Did you own the home, okay, for at least 2 out of 5 years? And was it your primary residence for at least 2 out of the last 5 years? Did you own it and reside in it as your primary residence for 2 out of the last 5 years? Now, you might say, well, of course, if I live there, I own it. Well, you might just be living there. You might have rented it for 1 year and then bought it for the past year and then sold it. Well, you didn't own it. You lived there for 2 out of the last 5, but you didn't own it, right? So did you own it, and was it your primary residence for 2 out of the last 5 years? Had an individual who's had a rental property on the front of her property. She lived in the house sort of, just in on the property, but there was a rental home that she had at the front part of her property, and was getting older and didn't really want to maintain it anymore, right? That required, while she liked the income, required a lot of work, and because prices, increased significantly, it was, okay, well, this might be a great time to sell this thing. Well, she's owned it for, 30 years, but she'd never lived in it. That was never her primary residence. So when she sold it, yes, we had to calculate what the gain is, and it's taxable on her taxes this year. So if you did own it and live in it, it was your primary residence for 2 out of the last 5 years, then as a single individual, you get to exclude up to $250,000 of gain. If you are married filing jointly, up to $500,000 of gain, which for most people, unless you live in a very highly populated area, metropolitan area on the coastal regions, that sort of thing, likely that's going to mean you don't have to pay tax on the gain. Just again, depends how much gain you had. But 2, if you owned and lived in it for 2 out of the last 5 years, then you get to exclude up to $250,000 as a single individual, up to $500,000 as a married filing jointly. But you also need to make sure that you haven't taken that same exclusion within the past 2 years, right? Because it's 2 out of the last 5 years, you could technically live in 2 different houses as your primary residence for 2 years out of a 5-year period. You've just got to make sure that you don't sell and take a exclusion against a house within 2 years of then selling and trying to take another exclusion. And that would happen when you own 2 different houses, you've lived in one. Okay, you've lived in one and for 2 years, and then you sell it, and then you move and you live in another one, and then you sell that one. It's possible. I just had it last year where an individual was technically eligible, had owned and resided in 2 different houses, 2 out of the previous 5 years, and sold each of them, and was only able to get the gain exclusion on one of them because that didn't meet the 2-year time period. So looking at it a different way, when you sell your house, these are the situations where the capital gain, that gain, would be taxable on your tax return. 1, the house wasn't your primary residence. So if you owned it, but it was a rental, Airbnb, that sort of thing, it wasn't your primary residence, then you'd have to, the gain would be taxable. If you own the property less than 2 years, if you didn't live in the house as your primary residence for at least 2 years out of the 5, if you had already claimed this $250,000 or $500,000 exclusion on another home within that 2-year time period, you bought a house using a like-kind exchange, 1031 exchange, that's not the topic for today, or you are subject to expatriate tax. Those are the reasons when it would be taxable. Now, certainly there's a scenario where you owned and resided in the property for 2 out of the last 5 years, and the gain exceeds the exclusion amount. And certainly if you live in New York or Boston or Atlanta and those, in California areas, yes, that will be common. And that's the case where if you had $700,000 worth of gain, you would exclude $500,000 of that, and $200,000 of the gain would land on your federal tax return. And lastly, there are a couple of exceptions. If you're going through a divorce, separated, and that forces you to sell your house, there's an exception there. If you're recently widowed, then there's an exception there. Military, or there's a few other exceptions. So just because you maybe haven't resided in the home for 2 out of the last 5 years, or owned it for 2 out of the last 5 years, certainly look to make sure that you don't qualify for one of the rare exceptions as well. But they don't apply in every situation. All right, so that's how it works. If you are subject to paying tax on the gain, then you're going to really want to work with your certified financial planner to take a look at what other tax planning strategies might exist. If this is a unique year where all of a sudden you're going to have more gain on your tax return, are there some other things that you can do in this year to help offset that? Maybe some, bunching up some charitable contributions so that you itemize. Maybe this is the year that you really stretch and take some money from some other areas to max out your retirement savings, or you switch from Roth contributions to pre-tax or something like that. So look at what your tax planning strategies should be if this is a unique year where all of a sudden you're having to pay tax and claim some of this capital gain on your tax return from selling your house. So work with your certified financial planner on that. Make sure that they're doing comprehensive financial planning, tax planning as part of that. If you don't have one of those on your team, contact one on my team. Find us online, Korhorn.com. That's Korhorn with K, wisemoneyshow.com. You can find us there as well, or give us a call, 574-247-5898. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.